Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Everything in bloom on the 8th? Or Roger's shortest ever video? Really isn't much. I just had a count up, and as a percentage of the number of orchids I've got, the number in bloom is less than 2%. It's just the time of year. I just have to live with it. Anyway, I've only got one Talumnia in bloom. I think this one's got a name. Yep, this is Jarak Firm Hickory, and it's a nice blend of colours if it'll keep still, otherwise it'll go out of focus. Yeah, it's got a good balance of colours, a deep burgundy red round the outside, a different red in the centre, surrounded by yellow, and then a few little white tinges here and there. So yeah, nice balance of colours on that one. Not a large bloom, I'd say average size for Talumnias. You can get Talumnias with larger blooms, and some are tiny. But that's that one. And then coming down here, we've got our, our little Cattleya, nice little miniature plant. And this is Cattleya Little Lemon Drops crossed with Encyclia vitellina, I think it is. Anyway, there'll be a pop-up, won't there, as usual. Lovely blooms on this. Opens quite a pale yellow and then gradually darkens, especially the colours in the lip. Slightly recurved, yeah, but nonetheless, attractive blooms and a lovely miniature plant. Now I'm going to have to do today in parts. But before I get into moving plants around, I'd just like to do this. This is a... Well, you didn't make it, did you? This is my Dendrobium glomeratum, and the buds are now starting to show their spur, so it shouldn't be too long before they open. But these are a deep purple. They haven't got that colour on the buds yet. Notice the size of the buds. These blooms are very similar to Hibiki blooms, except for the size. And we've got several lots. There's some more somewhere. Yeah, there's some more down here to come. So at long last it's going to bloom, but it didn't make it for today. This one didn't make it either. That's the Tahitian dancer. There's several things didn't make it. While we're on the didn't make it subject, my Latoria down here. I think that's Alexandrae. Yes, it is. That didn't make it. The Cymbidium didn't make it. All the twinkles didn't make it. But the mummy of the twinkles, sotoanum, has made it. This is quite honestly almost in its full glory now. There's still some buds lurking down the back there that haven't opened. I'm thinking of taking this to the Orchid Society meeting tomorrow. But to do so, I'll have to give it a bit of a clean, and it's whether I can be bothered. It's got bug bodies on it. They're not living buds, but when I had those aphids earlier in the year, they did get on some other plants. Now, they've been killed off, but there's residual bodies in places where there's clusters. There's some little remains got in there that would all need wiping off. It would have to be clean, and a few leaves might need just a trim. I've got some spotting on some of the leaves, but on Oncidium types that's normally accepted, but it would need a bit of a clean up and a tidy up, and it's whether I can be bothered. I've got a feeling it's going to be chucking it down with rain all day tomorrow, which means there aren't going to be many people there at the meeting anyway. So we shall see. This is one of the ones from the house. This is Catherine Zock, variety Mealy. And this has nearly had it now as far as bloom is concerned. There's just a couple of spikes that have recently opened left to go. And with this one, I'm seriously waiting for some new growths to show. There's no sign of any yet, no sign at all. But it's in that cocoa media stuff, which I'm not too happy with. It's just difficult to control watering. If you can get your head around that media, it's actually good stuff. but it does have a tendency to, when it breaks down, it just goes quite quickly. So you go from a happy root system to a failing root system in quite a short space of time. But I don't like it because it doesn't suit my watering style. But that doesn't mean to say it isn't any good. It's just not very good for me. And that's a failing on my part, really, because it's pretty good stuff to grow things in. Anyway, we've got that one. That's from in the house. That's one of our house-grown plants. And then over here, before I have to start moving stuff around, is my only Masdevallia in bloom. And this has no ID. I did see one at the Wessex show that was virtually identical to this. But there's an awful lot of Masdevallia hybrids on the market. You know, it may look identical, but that doesn't mean to say it is that hybrid when there's lots that are similar. But I'd like to know what it's called. It is a very attractive bloom. Very attractive. And a good size. Yeah, a good size bloom. Lovely deep orange. It opens paler than that and then darkens. But the gradation from the deep orange in the centre out through the yellows into the creams and then onto the white. And then the orange is picked up on the tails again. So yeah, it's a very attractive bloom. It's the only Masdevallia or Dracula or anything in that line that's out at the moment. And it's lasting quite a long time. It's been open a while now. So that one's doing okay. Now come on and get some more blooms going. That hasn't bloomed for more than 2 years. Nuisance. Right, now I'll have to start moving stuff around, so I'll be back. Well, this is the only one of the store-bought Phalaenopsis that's still got blooms on. I did the video where the other two spikes were cut, hoping to produce a branch. As they're sort of house-grown plants, I'm letting that, well, trying to let that happen on the grounds that's what a lot of people would do that grow in the home. Personally, I'm not too keen on a spike that comes up nice and straight and then just kinks out sideways. It doesn't appeal to me, but they might not even branch, so it might not even happen. This one, however, does have a naturally branching stem. And this particular spike has 2 branches on it that should push on okay. Some of the others have got none. In fact, all of the others have got none. That doesn't mean to say they won't branch out later. But the colours on this one change dramatically. If you take this colour on that one, that's a very pale, washed out colour. And look at the colour of the one behind it. Quite different. And then come over here and have a look at the depth of colour on that one. So it's a bit of a colour changer. I'm still trying to work out which way round it goes. I think it fades as they get older. So it opens bright with deep colours. In fact, yes, it must be that way round, quite honestly. But yeah, it's 2 plants in the pot, as was often the case from the source that this came from, which was Anthera or Anthera, whatever it is. Well, they often have 2 in the pot. But you know, that's enabled the plant to be sold with 4 flower spikes, 2 on each. Yeah, so you know, more likely to sell, I would say, than if it only had 2. Anyway, that'll have to come out of its pot down the line, but it's quite a long way down the line. It's got a good root system and it's in mainly bark, and the bark seems reasonable quality, so I'm not in any rush to get that out of the pot. So we'll see how it goes with that one. And then the only other Phalaenopsis I've got out is one of my little mounted ones, a little mini phal. And this has been in bloom for an absolute age. And it's a delicate little bloom. I would suggest that this is probably, it is a hybrid, but it's not far from a species. I suspect it's possibly a 2nd generation hybrid, so possibly a species crossed with either another species or a hybrid that was already a primary cross, and then possibly crossed again with something similar. But it's not far away from a species. It's just the shape. Yeah, shape and size lends itself to being more like a species. For me, anyway. I might be talking rubbish and it's nothing of the sort. But so that's the 2 Phalaenopsis. Right, what else can we find? Well, I thought as I'm a bit thin on the ground, it might be worth getting some of the Ristrepias out. I mean, I've still got some young plants that have yet to bloom. and I've got some plants I've had quite a long time, and then a couple in between, but 3 of them have currently got blooms on. These 2 here both came from the originated from the Eric Young Foundation. There was a job lot for sale by Peter White, Orchid Accessories, at one of the shows, so I got a couple. One has taken off like a rocket and the other one hasn't. But they both got blooms. This one over here is, I don't know if, oh, this is Handois. Again, Eric Young Foundation tend to have a French tinge to the names, and this is a very attractive bloom. It's quite small. On this plant they're normally a bit bigger, but this one really objected to being repotted. It didn't like it at all. But it's just started to grow again. It's just started to put up some new growths. Hopefully they're going to open not like this round here, which is what happens if you don't get enough hydration either in from the roots and or in the air. These are real high humidity lovers. 90% and they love it. Most of the rest of the plants start rotting at that point, but these love it. So that's that little one. Not growing so well, that one. And this one got repotted at roughly the same time and took off like a rocket. Like some other things in here, a little bit too much light, methinks. Well, I don't think, I know. It's recovering from its repot now, but it has taken a little while, but it is pushing up quite a few new growths, and it has got starting to bloom. Now this one has got a large bloom. Yeah, for a Restrepia that is a pretty large bloom. Let's see if I can get it in some bright light, and I might be able to get a bit closer if it will stop waggling. I can only get so close handheld, but yeah, lovely shaped blooms, alien-like, and a good size on that one. And that one is the one with no tag. Oh, so I'll do a pop-up. And then this one over here I've had for ages, and this one again, after repotting, you've disturbed your roots. My humidity's not as high as it would like. It's sufficient, providing it hydrates well from the roots. So the first few growths that pushed up got the distorted leaves, but since then they're now opening clean. So it's okay now. It's re-established this root system, and there's a hell of a lot of new growth on here all over the plant, and it's having a little spurt at the moment. It's actually got quite a few blooms on it, you know, in various, quite a few have gone over recently as well, and there's more to come. So that's a species, Falkenbergii, that came from Burnham's originally quite a lot of years ago as well, and it's probably my favourite bloom, but unfortunately they're tiny, you know, compared with the last one we looked at. These are probably, you know, a third the size, and this camera is probably going to shuffle up those stripes, but that is a deep golden yellow with red stripes, and unfortunately the camera will probably blur them, but it's a lovely little bloom and quite a prolific bloomer. I mean, all of my Restrepias need a tidy up, and what I mean by that is when you get a blooming growth like this, all these little dead bits here are ex-blooms. And if you look on that single growth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 previous blooms that have gone, and it's still blooming. So that's the 6th bloom from that single leaf. Yeah, and some of them are like that. But unfortunately, if you don't go round and snip, 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 you leave all these tatty little bits. I mean, I've seen some people put Restrepias in show with all these bits on. I know it's natural, but it's not. You have to get your show head on if you're going to put a plant in a show, and they do need to look tidy and presentable, you know. And this one would take a lot of tidying, a hell of a lot. Look how many of these there are. They're everywhere. That's because it's a prolific bloomer, and each shoot can produce many blooms. Each shoot can produce a kiki. Then you've got a new plant. Yeah. So at the end of this one, it's had lots of blooms, it's produced a kiki, and they're blooming. Yeah. So this is a prolific little species, this one. It pushes on well. but you can see the tidying that would need to be done if that had to go out to play. Plus it would be very frowned upon to turn up at a show with leaves like that. So then what do? You sacrifice that growth to make it look pretty? Or just don't take it. That's your other choice, I suppose, which is what I do. I don't think I've ever taken a Restrepia to a show, despite having some reasonable ones. Anyway, that's the 3 Restrepias. Out of the 4 blooming size ones, 3 are in bloom, so that's not bad. And they tend to hide away because they're a faff to get out. And to have a close look at these blooms has to be a tripod. I mean, I'll go in on that one as it's in bright light, and at some point you'll see it blur. Oops, casting a shadow now, that won't help. That's not bad, I'm only a couple of inches away, I think it's still in focus. But they do warrant close inspection. And preferably still. The patterning on this one is a base colour of a creamy greeny yellow colour, and then the stripes are made up of dots. So dots and dashes rather than actual stripes. But from a distance they appear to be stripes. So they do vary. Well, I'd get complaints if we didn't have a look at Hibiki, but it is fading now. There have been quite a few blooms have dropped. You can see they're starting to turn. Yeah, so it's not going to be in bloom too much longer, and then it's a matter of pushing on the new growths and seeing what else we can do. There's still places on some of the older canes that, like nodes, that haven't bloomed yet, so there could still be some blooms to push out from some of the older canes, but really we're looking at pushing on the new growths now, of which there are quite a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and around the back 5 or 6 new growths coming on. It's possible they won't reach this size. Most of the other people's versions of this plant, which all were bought at the same time in the same place, I know quite a few people that grabbed one. I was the only one that grabbed one that wasn't in bloom because I saw the one with the largest canes, which potentially would bloom better. So that's what I chose. But nonetheless, most of the others have got more compact plants. The problem with that being that all the leaves get in the way of viewing the blooms. As I've got lovely exposed blooms on mine. Now it might not look like that next time. Once these new growths grow, if they don't get up to this sort of size, then relative to the amount of exposed cane, the leaves will be closer in. So there won't be as much room for the blooms without being cluttered up by the leaves. So anyway, it's still in bloom, but there's no buds. These are all blooms and they are starting to fade. So whether this one will make it till everything in bloom next month, I doubt it. They are starting to go. But nonetheless, it's been out absolutely ages. And you just can't complain. It's a really long-lasting bloom. Now that those glomeratum buds we looked at earlier, if you can imagine a similar shape, I suppose, probably 3 times the size, much deeper purple and without the orange. So that's what we're looking forward to. But that is my only dendrobium in bloom out of 50 plus. But then most of them are late winter, early spring bloomers, and I'm into summer. It's not their time of year. And my nobiles are behaving themselves and haven't come into bloom at the wrong time of year. Mine are all patiently waiting. Kuniko's gone now, so that's been in bloom absolutely ages, but the last of the blooms have gone on that one now. So again, waiting for the newer growths to mature, drop their leaves, and then they can start to bloom. But I think most of the old canes have now finished. Anyway, so that's the dendrobium that's out at the moment. Now, as far as the larger Cattleyas are concerned, although I've got 2 separate plants in bloom, they are in fact the same plant. It was a plant we split a while ago. The reason being, when I got it, it had some real manky leaves on it. The oldest part of the plant, fair enough, but leaves that had kinked over and marked and possible bug damage in its history. And so we decided to put the old part of the plant in a pot and see if it would shoot out. And blow me, it shot out in two directions. So new growth here that managed a single bloom. I wasn't expecting anything out of that, I must admit. I wasn't even expecting it to live. But it's grown, it's produced two new leads, which will now progress. So eventually these tatty old leaves can be cut off. Perhaps the whole pseudobulbs can come off and just forget I ever saw them, basically. The front part of the plant, which in the main was my growths, so we've obviously got reasonable leaves, yeah. That was potted up separately and produced a single new lead, and at the time it was pushing new roots out from its previous growth, the one that had bloomed previously. You can see the progression through here. It's only got 3 bulbs on it. That was taking a risk, that front end. I usually say 3 bulbs and a new growth, or preferably 4. So 2 was pushing my luck. But we had new roots growing. It then pushed out a new lead, which also produced some roots. They've gone right down out the bottom of the pot, round the bottom of the pot. And this one has produced a more normal spike for this Cattleya, which has got 3 blooms on. They've only just opened. There is a difference in colour. It fades deeper. So rather than fading paler, this one gets deeper. So this one's got a better colour on it than these that have just opened. And even these vary slightly because they opened over a 2-day period. So the first morning I came out, one of them had just opened, and then the next day the other 2 were open by the end of the day. But I like it. It's a nice, well-balanced Cattleya. I mean, some of them have been hybridized to such an extent now that the sepals are virtually irrelevant. We've just got 2 huge petals and a lip. So they've only got 3 parts showing, and the little tiny sepals are sort of tucked in behind and don't form part of the bloom. I'm not so keen on that shape. I like all the parts of the plant. And it's got a good frilly lip, lovely, lovely deep purple at the end of it, tinges of yellow in the centre, and those tinges of yellow are reflected in the 2 petals as well, along with the deep purple. So there's a balance between the lip and the 2 petals, and then the purple is picked up again on the sepals. So it's a nice, well-balanced coloured plant. I like it. Quite honestly, I like them when they're this colour all over, but with a bit of yellow. But nonetheless, 2 separate plants now. Old bit and a new bit, and they both managed to push some blooms out, so progress on those 2. My little Deesa's looking quite nice at the moment, blooming at totally the wrong time of year. It's just, well, so be it, I'll have them when they're going. We've actually got 4 blooms out on there, and looks like a 5th's going to open, so that's one of its better spikes that it's produced. And my Deesas, one of them I had 3 potfuls, one of them I gave away to a friend who also keeps Deesas, so I wasn't springing one on him, as they say. He was used to looking after them. They are a bit strange, well, different. So that's where one went. The pot full of young ones is not doing so well. And this pot full had 3 in it when it started. 2 of them have bloomed. This is the last one. So that's the 3 what I'll call mother plants. But what happens with Deesas is they produce plantlets from the side. The older plant, will once it's bloomed, it will just die. And the plants that are left grow on and become blooming plants later, if they don't rot and die. But the 3 original plants in there have been in there quite a while now, and I've probably missed my chance. Probably, there's the reason. But it's probably best to do Deesas in the autumn, not wait till winter, it's too late by then. And take them out of their pots. Any plants that have already bloomed, anything that's attached to them, detach those and pot them up separately, and basically discard those bloomed plants, because they're not going to do anything. Once they've produced their little side plants, that's all they're going to do. They're just going to die back. And if you let them do that, they can set off some rot in the pot, because they've got like a little, I suppose you could call it a bulb. I think it's called a stolon, but there's a little swelling at the base of the plant underground, and that will rot. And if the little side plants are attached to it, it can set off a chain reaction. So it's better to get on and do them. But I've missed my chance this year. So this pot full are going to get dealt with in the spring as I see growth moving. And then we'll get them out of the pot, get rid of the 2 old plants, one of which has already died back and disappeared completely. This is actually a new plant, not the old one, and this one. And then we'll see what's left and pot them up separately, and then they can be grown on. They can get to blooming size in a couple of years. They don't take ages like some types of orchids, but they do need that replenishment. Just leaving them in the same pot for years, you'll end up losing the lot probably. So as I say, little rots can set off inside the pot, but a lot of that will depend on your media. I use quite a lot of grit in my media. It's got to be an acidic media, or they just don't grow. So I've got a peat and grit and perlite mix with some chopped up sphagnum. So it's a moisture retentive thing. These are bog plants effectively. They can be found growing standing in water, literally, with water all round them. And when the rains are heavy and everything, the whole plant can be submerged underwater. And then when the water drops down, they're still okay. So they're bog plants. They love it and hate to dry. So they need moisture retention and an acidic media base. So good bit of moss, good bit of peat in there does that job, and a good bit of grit and perlite or something like that to get the drainage so they don't get too soggy. So a bit different to some of the other orchids, and quite honestly the blooms are different too. These are South African. African genus. Unusual structure. Still, it's in bloom despite it being the wrong time of year. We'll have some of that. Both my Vandas are open at the moment. This orangey one. This opens a wishy-washy colour and gets a better colour as it ages. Opens a bit dull and then just gets better as it ages. Quite tight clusters. That's got Ascocentrum in it, I would suggest. So it was probably, when it was originally crossed, called an Ascocenda, a cross between an Ascocentrum and a Vanda, or whichever way round. They tend to have smaller blooms, more of them, and quite tightly clustered. So this plant had a problem a while back and dumped an awful lot of its lower leaves. But it does have a nice kiki growing, and the plan is that when that grows up, it will grow up in front of this tatty bit and hide it. But the plant will have to be turned round the other way, because at the moment the spikes always come out facing this way with the kiki at the back. So I just reverse the plant round like that, grow the kiki on, and the blooms will come out the other side from now on. We'll see if we can get that kiki going a bit. It's doubled in size over the last year or so. This is still pushing out leaves. It's still actively growing. So it's a nice plant. The big purple thing is showing off at the moment with 2 spikes. That's the first time it's ever done that. And they're both good spikes. I mean, this will be a good one to take to the meeting tomorrow. But what a faff. So it's not going to happen. It's a large plant. Trying to transport that in the car is probably going to end up with an accident happening. So it's not going to happen. Massive blooms on this. Absolutely gorgeous. Cerulean is definitely in there somewhere. It's quite a complex hybrid. Good number of blooms on both spikes. Very pleased. It's already bloomed once this year. I think this is its second. And this is the second time it's done this. It produces a bloom in mid-year, and then it produces another spike that moves into winter. And in some ways that's good, because it means the blooms last a lot longer because it's cooler. Yeah, so we should get quite a long period out of these. They're very attractive. There's no way that's ever going anywhere. It's not a bad plant. It's pushed up a lot of new leaves this year, and the leaves go right down to the base, although a couple of the lowest leaves are tatty now. But you think those leaves are probably, 10, 12 years old? Oldest ones. That one got cut at some point. So some of the lower leaves are a bit tatty, but that seems to be typical of Vandas. To keep your Vanda leaves perfect over a sort of 10 to 20 year period is quite difficult. They do tend to get knocked a bit, But nonetheless, it's not a bad plant. It seems to grow well, and it blooms with that. So I'm well pleased with this, and that's its best performance to date. 2 spikes at the same time. It may never do that again. Yeah, it's just a matter of how well it grows, how many new leaves it puts up at the point where it decides to bloom. And if there's enough new leaves above those nodes, it may push out more than 1 spike. So this is the first time it's happened for me. So that's the 2 Vandas, 2 out of 2. Yeah, they're doing okay. I haven't included the other Vandaceous types, because they're not doing much at all. But these 2 are doing well. And last but not least is my Coelogyne mooreana, Magnifica. And this is a pain to grow, well, it is for me. Other people seem to grow it fine. But I have trouble with this because as a plant, it hates to go dry. And if it goes dry, it does this with the leaves. It's basically an objection to a dry period. They get distortions on the leaves. And this is the equivalent of the Oncidium concertina leaves. And I've seen many other people that have this problem, so it's not just me. But basically, they don't like root disturbance. So it's ultra important to make sure there's a new root system currently active, growing when they're repotted. Certainly in my experience, they just dump the old roots. So you're reliant on those new roots. And during that period, the plant doesn't get hydrated enough. So you get that problem with the leaves. Now, I'm hoping this can stay in its pot for a bit now. But basically, it put up a new growth here, which is bordering on it. Well, it would have been aerial. That did have a spike that blasted, but it's producing 2 new leaves. That'll help, with the strength of the plant. And then it pushed up this spike, which promptly came into bloom. And it's just a single bloom, which is a very weak, feeble spike for this plant. If you can imagine a spike with 5 or 6 of these blooms, it's quite a stunner. Classed as one of the large white Coelogynes. And it is absolutely stunning. The patterning inside that lip, which is difficult to see because it's not fully open yet. It's going to open a bit more than that. But basically it's a deep orange gold, and it's hairy. Very, very attractive. And pristine white. They sparkle when they catch the light. So absolutely gorgeous, and one is better than none. I've had 2 spikes. I've got two plants basically. It was divided quite a while ago, and that set it back. Both being divided and being repotted. It didn't like either of those. So I'm trying to get it going again. It does have roots now. And that's a much better root system on this plant than on the other one. Pushed up a lead here a while back. That's not a full-size bulb, but at least it hasn't shriveled, and it's got roots underneath it, so hopefully it won't. The older part of the plant desiccated quite badly, yeah, and I've now got a new growth that should swell up, and then when this one's finished blooming, this one should swell up and the leaves should carry on growing. So that would be 3 new growths on top of the 5 older growths, so that's pushing on now. So this one should pick up a bit, but oh, those colours are absolutely gorgeous. So there we go. That's everything in bloom on the 8th. Not a lot, and yes, I have dragged it out a bit. If I'd done one of my whiz rounds, then it would have been 5 minutes. Anyway, I'm not sure there'll be much more next time round. We'll be in the middle of winter next time round, when it's the 8th, and we'll be into putting our Christmas party hats on, and in my case getting my Christmas tie out, because I've got a couple of Christmas do's to go to. But that's a month or more away. We'll worry about that when the time comes round. To blow the dust off me tie, won't I? Anyway, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.